Okay, I have the cue that everybody's here, Josh, and so we'll start. I want to welcome you to today's fireside chat. If you're able to see the screen here, and hopefully you are, you can see the title. It's long and it might even look painful, but I promise our discussion today will take some of the pain out of that. But we are going to talk about the evolution of building codes, present and future state, right, to bring us to where we are, that are shaping the future of high performance buildings. So just making sure you're in the right session. And the fireside chat, Josh and I, and I'll introduce us in a minute, it's almost cold enough to sit by a fireside for this, but it really speaks more to how we want to have this conversation with you, because I feel like so many times topics like this are arduous and heavy, and they feel like they are going to be painful, and we're going to try to make it so it's not. And in part because of Josh's capability and what he does every day, and the fact that we really want to make this meaningful and practical to folks who participate in this. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Rob Tanner. I am the product marketing director for the Johnson Controls North America HVAC business. And joining today, I've mentioned his name already, and the reason you're on this call is because Josh Brackett's here. Josh, I'm so glad to have you here. Josh is the System Regulatory Director of Facilities for Banner Health. And we'll talk more about the breadth of Banner Health, where they're located, the number of facilities under that. But as you look at that, there's a lot that Josh is doing. And what I really love is the way Josh does it. And we'll get to talk about some of that. Josh is a healthcare facility regulation and management expert, and he's well known in the industry as a speaker. He's also, and I think this was an interesting discovery, he's also the co-founder of something that he and his wife, Lindsay, had started, the Legacy FM, which is a healthcare facilities management training provider. And I looked at that, Josh, and I think most of that is self-directed online learning that's available. And I love that you're paying it forward to help others achieve things that you're discovering and learning as you're going through your daily functions and all the things that you do. And at some point, what I'd like to do is include a link here to Legacy FM, so folks who are not familiar with that could get to that and be able to check that out. So at some point, we want to be able to drop that in. So over the next approximate hour, we're going to dive into a lot of things relative to building codes. And again, we're going to try to keep this really relevant, but go systematically so we can make sense of it. We're going to talk about high performance buildings, including the future of design, commission, retrofit, and operations. But we must first visit what they are and what the present state looks like. Where are we living today, and how are we dealing with all of those standards and all the codes behind all those standards today? Because I want to make sure we cover, and Josh, we've talked about this, some real world examples, things that are actionable, that folks who are also in the healthcare industry like you are, who are on this call, but even the extensibility of that to folks who are maybe in a different industry, who still have to go through some of the same process of understanding codes and then being able to figure out how does that influence what we do in our facilities. So Josh, thanks for joining me today. Glad to have you here. Glad to be able to speak to you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Rob. It's my pleasure. So and honor. I'm excited to talk about this and hopefully help others out in the industry.
Good. That's what we're hoping for too. So, but before we dive in for our audience, I just want to let you know that we do have a question box available for you, and I want you to put questions in there anytime. Don't hesitate, even if they get answered in some of the dialogue as we go. I'd rather have them there because there might be some nuance of that we could bring out. We're committing to spend some time at the end of the session on Q&A, and this is your chance to be able to ask Josh some things. Obviously, there'll be opportunities beyond this this webinar to do that, but I want to make sure you have a chance to ask as many as you can in the session, because we're going to cover a lot of ground, but we're certainly not going to cover all the ground. So there's going to be things that might be top of mind for you that maybe we didn't address, or we didn't address in a manner that helps you immediately. So we want to give you that opportunity. And I also want to remind folks on this call that this is the first of 3 fireside chats in our ongoing Building Performance Standard webinar series, brought to you by Johnson Controls. And our goal with each session is to offer practical, real-world takeaways that you and your team can use to navigate through building performance standards across all of your facility operations. And I'm really excited to have Josh here to be able to do that. Josh obviously has focus as a part of Banner Health. His focus is healthcare systems, and so there will be a lot of things really relevant to that. But I love the idea that, Josh, you're broader than that in your thinking and even in your experience. I'll park for the moment that you're a fire geek, but we'll come back to that at some point in the conversation. And but be able to offer insights I think could be relevant to folks who may be in a different industry or may have other interests in other industries as well. All right, so to get the conversation going and to walk through this a little systematically, let's first really talk about why some of the building codes are changing now. And I think what we'd like to dive into first, Josh, is looking at that current state of building codes and standards. And we know that building performance standards laws, they vary widely across the US. But it's important to understand what's driving those, particularly current changes, and then how are building stakeholders like yourself, how are you responding to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and you're right. I think it's important first to understand, like, I oversee Banner Health, which is across 6 states. We have 31 hospitals, 400-ish clinics, 26 million square feet, spanning 6 states, and each state is different. And sometimes each local jurisdiction, has their own requirements as well. So when I approach regulatory, like, we have to understand, like, we have building performance standards that are out there that exist. ASHRAE writes some, IECC writes some, right? But without a mechanism of adoption, none of them are enforceable. They're just out there, and if somebody wants to comply or wants to do something or wants to be a best practice, then they can. And we are in this really, I think, fascinating time right now. I follow a lot of federal work as well of what's going on federally, and we are not going to talk about politics, but it's important to understand the focus of the current administration versus the focus of the previous administration, right? Mm-hmm. And understand that it is different. We have seen less of a focus on energy efficiency and less of a focus on electrification. And it's the reality of what we're living is what it is. But even if the federal says, we aren't going to recognize this, we're not going to adopt this, and some jurisdictions, some industries like healthcare, right? So we fall under local and state and federal jurisdiction in different capacities. Federal, for us, carries the biggest hammer because it's CMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and some hospitals or hospital systems, up to 80% of their funding comes from Medicare and Medicaid, right? That's a pretty, when you're talking billions and trillions of dollars, that's a pretty big lever that they can pull, right? So, but that doesn't mean that we don't have to comply with state and local. So when you look at the landscape of these codes and standards, there was this, I would say, symbiotic relationship in the past where they were kind of going the same direction on, we are wasting a bunch of energy, right? We are not performing at the peak capacity that we should be in general, right? And especially some of the larger cities, Denver's a good example, right, has started adopting some local requirements of we've got to do better for the electrification of our grid, to be able to support the grid, to be able to support our community. We're going to implement XYZ laws enforcing requirements for even existing buildings. But now there is this divergence that has occurred, right? And it's not as big of a focus in the current federal administration, and that now puts some, like I can speak for hospitals, and I think that's I think where my best focus is there's decisions that have to be made, right? And there is a cost, one way or another, of implementing these or not implementing these. Being a high performing building, meeting these standards and requirements. So it's a very interesting landscape right now, honestly.
And Josh, when you think about, again, lots of codes and standards that are in there, some of those related to energy efficiency, right? You've talked about, a lot of them related to energy efficiency. And then we've got ventilation codes, environmental condition codes, and some of those naturally feel at times like they're conflicting, right? For example, coming post-COVID, we increased ventilation. We said, okay, a lot of this air cleaning stuff maybe is not as effective. Let's make sure we're ventilating properly. But ventilation in most areas comes at a cost, right? We've got to condition the outside air. And so we've got to deal with that and simultaneously reduce our consumption of energy and shift it to more responsible, more, good for the planet, environmentally friendly, sustainable energy forms. And how are you, even as you look at some of those standards, how do you balance some of that as you look at the requirements there, even in the midst of all the where's the funding coming from and who's interested in supporting what and driving what initiative?
Yeah, it's really tough. I mean, it is very difficult because any business, any building, right, in a hospital system, at the end of the day, we may be nonprofit, most are nonprofit, but at the end of the day, you're still a business. There's still cash flow. You still have to make margin in order to serve your purpose and operate to serve your communities and your patients, right? So it's still a business. And money, unfortunately, nobody's figured out how to make it grow on trees yet. So
I'm still working on that, Josh. But
when you let me know, let me know when it happens. I'll take a few dollars from you. So, but we have to make some of those hard decisions sometimes. Of do I have the money to invest in this particular area or this specific energy efficiency related effort? What's the payback going to be on that versus can I take that same money and invest it into new patient care equipment that will help serve the community and generate additional revenue that may offset? And there is no right answer. It's very nuanced and it's very difficult, just like any business, right? I mean, it's when you're thinking through, if you had all the money in the world, right, then yeah, we could accomplish all of these things and be the best. But I think you brought up COVID, and that feels like forever ago. But yeah. I look back, and I was heavily involved in a lot of codes and standards during that time, and so many really awesome things came out of COVID. Some terrible things came out of it, right? And there's a lot of pros and cons, right? But I look at the code development side, and I think we started really understanding and looking at data. And I'm a huge proponent of data. And a lot of the codes and standards, you mentioned, I'm a fire geek, so I'm a fire protection engineer by background, and life safety code is kind of like in my blood. So, but a lot of a lot of our codes and standards from that side came from what I call blood codes. Somebody had to die in order for us to understand that we needed to make a shift and a change in the code, not understanding exactly what it needed to be or what it needed to say, but to do something to stop the bleeding, to stop the deaths, right? So, and overwhelmingly, like, that has been successful. I think universally, when you look at codes and standards, that's been successful. But when you look at what data did we use to make decisions, or why are we still doing this, a lot of times the data is not there, right? So it's an antiquated code, or we've always done it this way, is a very common thing that you hear. And I struggle with that, because it's, well, how do we know that a HEPA filter is good? How do we know 20 air changes per hour in an operating room is good?
Right.
What about the temperature and humidity requirements? Like, all of that really started getting questioned during COVID. I think we've made some big progress on a lot of those efforts. But to understand that, can you make a room? I think this is a great example, right? So, like, operating rooms don't even require HEPA filters. It's not even required. Right? Only a MERV 14 is, which means less fan energy. We have high air changes, but less fan energy for static pressure and pushing through. But can you make a room so clean that you don't have particles? Yeah, Intel has them all over the place. They're called clean rooms.
Yeah.
Some pharmaceuticals locations have it as well. And we can, but we don't do it in operating rooms, which is where we say, like, our infections happen, like a lot of our surgical site wound infections and all of that, right? And it's time that we really question a lot of those. I think when I think of building performance standards, right? So I'm thinking more globally and not just on energy efficiency.
Right.
Right. When I think about performance, it's helping us achieve our mission as an organization, which is really serving patients. And this is a mechanism of doing that.
Well, what I like about that, Josh, is I think that frames it in a practical, what's the end game? What's the goal here of all of these standards that we need to not just be cognizant of, but figure out how we're going to implement and to what extent. And it just anchors you to what's our mission, what's our purpose here with this. And in your case, it's the patient, right? Taking care of the patients that are going to benefit from the healthcare services offered by Banner Health in all the facilities, whether it's a hospital or outpatient facility that you offer, for at the right level of what health you're administering, right? Both through from a surgical procedure all the way to a healing process in a room, right? So yeah, I love that. And there's a couple of things I want to bring up that you brought forward too, but I want to shift a little bit into this, operational piece, because so much of it we talk about in terms of codes and building performance standards in the construction of something, whether that is a new facility or, and I imagine you Banner Health has and would have a mix of things that are new buildings and then many that are maybe inherited buildings, right? Acquired buildings that now become part of the system and need to be renovated, upgraded, to be able to meet a certain new level of standard or be able to provide the services that Banner Health wants to be able to provide. And so you quickly move into then, how do we operate those buildings, right? How have they been operated? How do we want to operate them? Where do we need? And then the building performance standard effectiveness on that. So how does that look in practice when you're looking across all of the operational teams really within the different local sites, and then some that might be broader across the breadth of the organization.
Yeah, I mean, so like this is actually something that I really love about Banner and something that I think could apply outside of just healthcare industries. But it's not common. We have a team that it's a peer of mine. His name is Brandon Conway. He oversees what we call our remote operations center for building management. And Banner started years ago, probably 8-10 years ago, a continuous commissioning based process. And that continuous commissioning based process has grown. It encompasses all of our hospitals now. We have line of sight to all of our building automation systems, can track and trend and see everything. More important than that, like they've continued to up the ante in the game of they worked with a company out of Europe and developed custom chiller surge algorithms where we predict chiller surge before it ever even happens. And we've got 2 engineers that they wake up every morning. They have direct line of sight to energy penalties that are happening real time. And they're able to see and allocate, this basically split the hospitals in 2, so 16-ish. And they work with the local teams, but then also we have regional experts, building management experts, as well as regional senior plant technicians that can be dispatched to help stop the penalty from occurring. Identify. We may not know exactly what's going on, but we see, well, there's this increased spike that happened at this air handler, at this valve, or this whatever. Something's going on. Here's the diagnostics. And what we find is that, unfortunately, like Rob, skilled trades is struggling. I mean, I'm sure you guys know this, right? So like, it's not a secret. And it's the same in healthcare. It's a lot of our technicians will hire somebody that if they have an HVAC background, they're probably going to get a job, right?
Yeah.
Now, HVAC for a home is a little bit different than 7,000 tons of cooling, right? So,
just a little different.
Right? But it takes years to become an expert in that. So we're able to dispatch, we're able to go see. I do think it's important because you said operational, and we, in facilities, we do not do a good job of telling our story. We are not storytellers. And I tell people all the time, like, you have to learn to tell stories, to get people engaged. And that implies to our CFOs, right, that are managing our money. Oftentimes, in general, the best story wins. Now, you've got to have that data and that backup and that support, but the best story wins. And we have long been framed as a cost department. All we do is cost the hospital. We're not generating revenue, right? So we're not bringing money in to our hospital system. And that applies really universally across all industries. What I argue, though, is that no, we are not a cost department. We are a dollar protecting department. It is our job to protect every penny that we can. The reason for that is where you really have to start understanding the C-suite's focus and how like the CFOs are managing money for their portion of the mission, right? And when you look at a hospital, the average across the nation, the average net operating margin of a hospital is 1%. That means for every $100 that I bring in, I put $1 in my pocket and $99 goes out the door.
Right.
No. That's a huge amount of revenue that has to be covered, that has to be generated to cover my $1.
Right. So a very small margin there to play with. Yeah.
So small. And so when we're looking at these energy penalties and we're looking at these costs and we're looking at how can I continuously improve in my performance, that performance is part of, like, when you shift your focus from it's just broken and it's just going to be broken to that has a direct impact to the mission of our organization, what we are trying to do. It doesn't matter how small it is. Sometimes it's not going to pay back, right? And that's where you have to make that risk-based determination. But a lot of the times when you're thinking about these building performance standards, it's about this continuous improvement based process. This, and I'm Lean Six Sigma black belt, so I'm like constantly thinking about like waste and how do we reduce waste and how do we get rid of this to improve our operations. And that could be, it's not just dollars, it's also time, it's also effort of staff. You know, it's all of that ties in.
So, and it started to, as I started to think about that too, there's, you know, on some level you think about, you know, developing high performance building strategy standards is straightforward, right? But as you mentioned, the nuances, and for the audience here, this idea of, and you've introduced a couple of interesting things, right? One is keeping what's our purpose of all of this in the forefront, and how does that weave into every piece of what you're doing, and then really looking at it and saying, shifting this mindset from you're a cost, and the only thing I want to do with a cost is reduce it, to how does that impact, again, our ability to perform the mission that we have, and to be able to tell a story that incorporates that, right? The story can't just be this failed and now I need, going to make up a number, $1 million to fix it. Okay, that just sounds like more cost, right? But if we don't do this, right, or here's the impact of this not functioning or not working the way it should work, right? Because many of those improvements that you make are incremental, right? Systems, and I think about the type of work that John's controls, because we're in 4 out of 5 hospitals in North America. So I know we're in, I know we're in many of the facilities in your network. And I think about the value propositions we bring forward. Many are incremental, right? It's that, how do we make a change and make an improvement and go after a certain metric, right, that we can measure and evaluate for you, that helps us to see other things that are possible as well too, right? Again, if you had all the money in the world, you'd probably say, I could come up with a plan and we'll do it all at once. But that's also really disruptive too, right? You can't just come in and tear everything out and say, I'd like to start with everything new again. And so, but I like we're on the same page in terms of the ways we would work together, and then the ways that others should be thinking about, or could be thinking about, their own facilities and expenses and building performance standards implementation. So you mentioned something that when we talked last time about in terms of some practical guidance that I thought was really interesting, and I wanted to pull out. You mentioned about, you talked about the waste, right, and the importance of the waste, but you had a pretty specific statement about leveraging. Was my interpretation, so if I got it wrong, let me know, Josh. Right, leveraging codes and standards to offset unnecessary spend.
Yes.
There's something in that just sort of like resonated with me in terms of a way to say that. Maybe it's part of that storytelling piece, but and then put that reduction of the waste to something useful.
Absolutely.
And maybe you could talk a little bit about maybe an example or a story you might have that you could share on that.
Yeah, I have a lot of stories, and it's mainly on the life safety side. But again, like I look at building performance as holistic, right? So, and I think that's important to like take a step back. It's so easy to just hyper focus on like, this is what a standard requires, right? But when you tie everything back like holistically, it all really does kind of fit together nicely. So codes and I tell architects and engineers this a lot. There's a lot of conversations that I have around in education around the paper is white, and on the paper are black letters. But when you're reading it, it all merges together and it's gray. There's so many options in our code standards and guidelines. There are so many options out there, hundreds and hundreds of options, that when you're actually designing a building, and I know this because I was an engineer and I designed fire protection systems for hospitals, and I think that I have officially apologized to everybody that now operates the hospitals that I work on. I think I've officially made it, but because if I would have known what I know now, I wouldn't have done anything that way.
Right.
And as an owner, on the owner side now, I'm constantly asking, did you provide us the ability to make an informed decision? And I have successfully at Banner, we've avoided over $100 million of life cycle cost spend because of leveraging alternative compliance options.
Got it.
And it can be anything, right? So like a lot of the codes and standards have this is a guideline or this is a standard. However, nothing in this standard is prescriptive and doesn't allow for the intent of an alternative way of achieving the same results, right? Or an alternative way, or any new technology that may come out that reduces the burden, right? Some of that requires that you go to an AHJ, some of it does not, right? An authority having jurisdiction. But when you look at it from that lens and that perspective, there's typically about 100 different ways you can skin a cat. And which one, the best one is, shouldn't be on the architects and engineers and contractors to decide.
Right.
But I also, at the same time, I yell at owners. Yell is, probably yell every so often. Yeah. If you don't make a decision, somebody's going to make it on your behalf. So if you don't take the time to understand and be educated and share, like, and help me understand that, like, that may not be my area of expertise, then somebody's just going to make the decision. And it's always going to default to the most stringent option.
Yes.
Which is typically the most costly option. Not always, but typically the most costly option, because
it's the one with the lowest risk for whoever's making that decision, right?
100%. I can stand in a courtroom and I can defend that I made what I felt was the right decision, right? But that means cost. And again, when we're looking at these margins and we're looking at that, every dollar matters, right? How can I look at this as optimization, right? You can use and leverage codes. It's not a baseline. Like, people treat it as a baseline. It's black and white and it's a baseline. It is actually a way and a mechanism for us to optimize. Optimize the operations. So, and I have a lot of examples of that we could go through of how to do that, but a lot of them are life safety related or,
Yeah, and those are, I'm imagining most of those are transferable, but there's some key elements in there, Josh, that I hope for our audience today, they're taking away a couple things, and we'll see as we approach some of the questions to determine how much of that resonates or how much of that needs some additional requirements. So, but
I will use an example though, like, or at least something to think about, like, because I think this helps, right? So we can use energy penalties, right? So like some cities are starting to require EUIs of existing buildings.
Yeah.
Some states, and again, it goes back to it's an evaluation, and
right.
What I do in my role is, my job is to help the decision makers at Banner make an informed decision. Similar to what I'm saying, like architects and engineers, what I'm asking for, I reciprocate to our leaders. And this is a law that has been passed
Mm-hmm.
And if we do not comply with this law, there is a cost, right? There is a fine, there is a penalty, there is a XYZ.
Yep.
And some hospitals, I'm take off banner hat. Some hospitals or hospital systems will absorb that and look at that as this is just the new cost of doing business,
Mm-hmm.
right? And say, I don't have the money and funds to achieve this EUI.
Right.
So instead, we will absorb it as a cost and we will work on bringing in additional revenue to offset that cost.
Okay.
I'm not saying that's necessarily the right approach.
Right.
It's probably the right approach for that hospital, though. If they are weighing the risks and they are understanding, then what we do know, though, is like they're highly, highly likely not going to get shut down because of it, right? So it's shutting down a hospital is first off really hard to do and only used in extreme circumstances. And it doesn't have to do with energy penalties. It has to do with patient care.
Right. Which, again, back to priority. That is the most important thing, right? So Josh, thinking about some of let's talk a little bit about the future before we come back to even some more practical implementation. What are some trends that you're seeing, even though what we're dealing with now has variability and adaptability, but there are codes written, even if there's some ability to interpret and apply them differently and intelligently, right, for the situation. Where do you see some of these things, and maybe just pick a couple of ones that are top of mind for you or that you're thinking about on a regular basis for sure. Where do you see those going as we look ahead in the coming years, and even doing that as best we can without like you said, without a political piece influencing that? We know that's going to be there, but if we just looked at it from an overall holistic approach.
I think so. Again, I'm excited about where we are, honestly. And when I take a step back and look, so like I'm in law school right now too. So like I'm looking at this from not just that political landscape, but like what is going on holistically in our country and where are we going? And thinking healthcare, we've heard, everybody knows it's $1.061 trillion is getting cut from Medicare and Medicaid. Yeah. That is a really big number. That's a lot of zeros. And that is going to put a lot of pressure. So here's what I have found time and time again, though. Like, innovation comes when pressure's put on.
Oh yeah.
It's easy to let things slide by when you're making money and when things are fine. Yep. It's through those hard times that we find like this spark and this thing is going to come up, and there's another way of doing it. And I'll use the example like in 24, Center for Medicare and Medicaid issued what's called a Quality and Safety Office letter, which is a informal addendum or interpretation to federal law. And they said, hey, newer codes are starting to allow healthcare microgrids, as an example.
Yep.
We are going to, even though we follow a really old code, we follow the 2012 edition of NFPA 101 Life Safety Code and 99 Healthcare Facilities Code. We're going to allow you to do this should you choose, right? And we're seeing that. We're seeing there are hospitals. There's a new hospital being built in Texas that they are leveraging and building a healthcare microgrid as their primary source. So the performance side, what that allows us to do, part of building performance is also reliability.
Yes. Yep.
It is redundancy. It is how can I continue operations in the event that something happens. Mm-hmm. So the innovation that has been happening on the electrification side or on the hydrogen fuel cell side or on like it is we are seeing that enter into our facilities, maybe not as a primary, right? But very much as a offset of, if I have an emergency event, or if I have this issue, then how can I remain operational? How can I continue to achieve my mission? And what I'm seeing, I actually just spoke about this morning on a podcast that I do, and I'm seeing more collaboration than I think I've ever seen for CMS, at least, right? For seeing where our accrediting organizations that govern, like, that come out and survey on behalf of CMS, they are being more collaborative on difficult issues that are going on, and are going to CMS on behalf of the hospitals. And there is this collaborative, call it triangle of conversation, going on. I think that's because, honestly, our industry is evolving, and I think things are getting more complicated. But as a result, the people that are overseeing these complicated systems and these building performance standards and what is going on, I feel like they are also upping their game. Like, I think the level of, I'm going to call it, competence in our industry continues to grow. We are not, facilities management is no longer just turning a wrench.
Yeah. And that is encouraging, Josh, too, because, you know, one of the things that we face and want to make sure we're clear with customers as we bring more technology to customers, particularly, you know, AI learning to systems, to say, let's use this data, let's use these algorithms to improve your operation. There immediately almost becomes this sense of, well, you're not going to need me anymore, right? This is, you know, and it's an interesting conversation because, one, it's real, right? And it hits us on all levels, everything from, I'll go back to your conversations about the industry of technicians, whether they're working on HVAC systems or other systems, this sense of, well, if this artificial intelligence is going to be operating everything, why will you need me? And the reality is the need for you grows. And to your comment, it actually requires you to up your game.
Yeah.
You're that much more important to be able to be a part of that process, because the complexity goes up as well, right? We're trying to shave more and more out of things, right? You know, tweak a little bit more, and then it's like, and we're, you know, pushing ourselves, right? As engineers, that's what we love to do anyway. How far can we go with this, right? And what can the data show us? And then can we create new data when we've gotten bored with the old data? And be able to give that sense of confidence. So I'm encouraged to hear that you're sensing from a standpoint of saying, hey, the knowledge is growing, how seriously people are taking things is growing, the collaboration, which I think is the biggest part, right, is growing, so that we're making better decisions, right, as we move closer and closer to a state of, at least intended outcome, is perfection, right? That's what we strive for, right? But I mean, that's encouraging to me, because like I said, we're facing that now. We're at a time, right? You're feeling this too, where more and more we need people with technical capabilities to help make all this happen, and those are becoming some really high-paying jobs, right? So, so it's an attractive industry. So, yeah, that's good. Josh, so right before we get into the questions, because I do want to move into those, we wanted to maybe recap a little bit of some practical takeaways for folks on the call from where we started with this discussion of codes and standards today, where examples of how you're seeing those implemented in healthcare systems that you're involved in, and even as it relates to other industries. And then a little discussion we just had on future state. Where are we going? Where is it trending? What are some things that folks who are part of this call that you would advise them to say, hey, you're in facilities operation, you're part of an ownership team, you're responsible for these things. What would you say to them as a takeaway advice?
There's a couple of things for sure. So I would say, first off, change the tune of your story, right? So like you own that we are, when you shift your mindset and you start thinking about it from the aspect of I'm in healthcare facilities personally, like me, to serve for Banner, Sophia. Sophia is our patient. That's who I serve, right? And I do this because I love that. And if that means that I'm allocating funds to another department to help Sophia, then we're allocating funds to that department because I believe that leadership has the right direction. So when you're fully bought into your mission, then that drives you. And but that doesn't mean that you are an inactive bystander. Right? So like, if you aren't telling the story, somebody else is going to get that capital funding, right? And how you tell that story is so important. It is not, as you said earlier, it is not just, it broke, I need $1 million to fix it. It is, okay, did you know that $1 million, if you don't invest and it goes down again, every time it goes down, we end up shutting down surgeries for 12 hours, and it offsets $5 million of revenue that's coming in, and 10% of those patients go to other hospital systems as a result because they're frustrated. And now you're telling the story to give the C-suite the ability to make an informed decision. Right? It's changing, but that takes partnership. It takes talking to other departments and understanding. So that's one thing. I think also, think of building performance standards as overarchingly just this continuous improvement model. It is not hard. I can walk out of that door and trip over opportunities to improve, right? And it just takes walking around. It takes intentionality and being intentional for teaching your teams. We are going to live, eat, and breathe continuous improvement. Right. And when you see a hot call or a cold call or something come in from which happens all the time, don't just override. You override is the easy button. Yeah. There's a reason. There's typically something else going on inside of your system that's causing issues. And digging into that is ultimately going to help you from a performance perspective, from a staffing, right? So staff will be happier, patients will be happier, HCAP scores will be good. You are probably going to be reducing energy in some capacity, right? And when you think of energy, don't just think about that like electrical or natural gas being served to the hospital. Energy is people moving. Energy is systems. Energy is like the molecular movement of anything is energy, right? So when you think about and change your perspective on a lot of these things, then your focus just shifts.
That's some real practical advice. I'm even thinking for myself, right, Josh? Some of those takeaways, and I hope those on the call got something meaningful out of that. So Josh, let's move into some time of Q&A, and I just wanted to be able to look through some of what we have here from a Q&A perspective. And there's one question here that I want to be able to bring forward that I think is interesting, and you talked about some of this, but maybe a nuance of this. So staying up to date with those latest codes and standards can be a challenge, right? You've addressed that. You've even addressed ways to be able to look at those a little differently, right? Instead of just the pain points, the opportunities that come with that. The question specifically is top recommendations for staying ahead of the curve on those types of items.
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, I would say if you have any ability to get into the codes and standards, like and the participation of developing or changing, I'm always going to start with that because you get to see how it works. And you can't get on all of them, right? And you don't want to be because that would literally be more than a full-time job.
Right.
But not everybody can, or not everybody has the knowledge, or not everybody has the bandwidth, or we have families, or you have school, or you have other competing priorities. That's okay too. This is actually, Rob, where I think AI is an excellent tool. It is very easy now I think one of the biggest investments somebody can make in themselves is really learning how to leverage new tools. AI is still a new tool, right? So, but learning how to prompt AI and actually spending time to understand when you give it if you just ask it a question, it's just going to give you an answer. Maybe right, it may be wrong, right? But when you tell it to act as a XYZ professional and you list out the specific requirements of I want you to search for A, B, C, D, and then these are your specific action items, it comes back with very specific and tailored information. So, and you can absolutely use and leverage it. There are tons of articles out there on the new standards that are coming out, or what were the changes from the previous code edition to the new one. Somebody's doing that work already, right? And even NFPA and ASHRAE, like they're coming, IBC, they have AI tools built in now that they're using and leveraging as well to be able to help with this information. So if you can't read and spend all of that time and you need the quick Reader's Digest to be able to say what are the top 5 points, that's a way that you can leverage it. Understand that you still have to validate, right? It's still on you to validate, but I'm all about reducing time to learn something.
Good. And you've given a practical use, and I think a lot of us are looking for those practical use of a relatively new tool for most of us to be able to save that time and to be able to stay ahead, right, of the curve, as the question asks. So you gave another question, and you gave some, I think, related tips on this, but some of the specifics of, and the question is phrased this way, I found it difficult to effectively communicate the importance, right, of these high performance building strategies to other leaders in the organization, particularly those that aren't, familiar with the ins and outs of facility management. And you touched on some of those audiences through there. And I think your answer is going to include storytelling and the right storytelling, but the specifics of how to approach those discussions when you have that situation.
So I think the more that you can make it real, and is important, right? So, and I use things, depending on what it is, right? So, if there is a legal implication, I always start with that.
Yeah.
Because it's very real, it's very tangible, it's very practical. Here is what would happen. It's very clear. If we don't do this, we are violating state, local, federal, whatever law. Okay. And there are repercussions. So I call them consequences. Every decision you make in life is consequences. And the daughters will tell you, sometimes you make good decisions and you get good consequences, and sometimes you make bad decisions and you get bad consequences.
Exactly.
Right? So, but you start with that. Then you tie back. If it's not that, then you tie it back to mission, and you understand, like, what's the purpose? Our job is to stay 24/7, so we take care of patients, right? Okay, well, here's that impact. We talk about, like, the example of operating rooms or whatever. Then it's also very important, and when in storytelling, I think this is very just, it's so true. When 1,000 people die, it's very easy for us as human beings to say, wow, that was tragic and it was awful, and then we move on with our life.
Yep.
Because we cannot conceptualize mass casualty.
Right.
It's not possible, right? Like our brains aren't wired for that.
Right.
But if I start saying names and I connect that I have XYZ patient's name, Sophia for Banner, right?
Yep.
If I have Sophia, Sophia has a name, she has a family, she has a story, she has a history. And you start connecting things and you say, this was preventable, this air handler went down, this is not being improved because of XYZ, and I need these funds. And this is a direct result of something that happened.
Yeah.
You have added a tremendous amount of strength to your story.
Yeah.
Because it's a person now. It's not an event. So making it, and every person that you're going to talk to, whether it's at a hospital or if it's in any other industry, they are going to resonate with something that is more personal and practical, and here are the real world implications, than if it's just, I need $1 million to fix this.
Correct. Right. And what I like in what you're saying too is you're, in all cases, whoever that person is, that's a customer, right? That's our, and our purpose is to take care of our customers, right? To serve our customers and to serve them well. So that's great, Josh. Josh, that's all the questions we have for now, but I want to be able to wrap up and start with a thank you to you for joining us today. I appreciate the time you've given, what you're doing in the industry as you're continuing, and again, the systems that you and your wife are involved in, the educational programs you're involved in there. Excited to know that that's available to people. And again, hopefully we had a chance to post that in the chat here for people to be able to share. If not, we'll make sure we follow up and send that out to everybody who attended. And for those of you who are on the call, thanks for joining us today. Thanks for being a part of this. Thanks for listening to this Fireside chat. Hopefully you got something meaningful out of this. And as we look ahead, I said this was one of 3. We have our next Fireside chat will be on Wednesday, April 8th. We'll have Ralph Denola, who is the founder of Building Insights Group, with us. And we'll get to talk about, again, more building performance standards, but a little different spin based on the work that Ralph is doing in his organization. And I already had a conversation with him about some of that, and I'm really excited about some of the things he's going to address. And he may get a little political, right? But that's okay. He told me I could say that, but appropriately so. So we'll dive into more about the risk, resilience, and the future of building design, and share ways to do that while we protect those investments and support the long-term performance of systems that we invest those funds in. So I hope to see you there. Again, April 8th on Wednesday. And if you should have an invite, if you got this invite, you'll certainly get an invite to the next one. And hopefully you share this with other folks who didn't get to participate in this, maybe some of your other colleagues. Let them know about this series. Still 2 to go. And our job and our focus is to keep it real, keep it practical and meaningful, so that you can take something away that you can do immediately, just like the insights that Josh has given us today. So thank you for your attendance. Have a great day.
Thank you.
All right. Josh, thank you again for this.
Thank you. This was great. I really appreciate it.
Good. Yeah, glad to have you a part of this. So. Let's see.